if GFI India was not there or GFI as an institution was not there, I would be interested in the sector, but I wouldn't know what to do, where to go, what resources to read. What I feel is still in its nascency, slightly absent today in India, which is actually being built out by the Department of Biotechnology, is access to labs at a subsidized rate, so that anyone anywhere who has fundamental knowledge of the sciences can access those resources and experiment. So the like BIRAG DBT is doing a phenomenal job improving access to these facilities.
Welcome everyone to the Smart Protein Pod by GFIdeas India, a podcast designed to educate and guide entrepreneurs, students, researchers, and early career professionals in the smart protein sector. We do this by inviting pioneers and trailblazers in science, business, government, and civil society who have shown exceptional vision for the future of our food system. I'm Aakashraj Bhople, Corporate Engagement Associate at the Good Food Institute India, and your host for the first episode. For those new here, GFIdeas India is a community started by GFI India for innovators creating or expanding access to smart protein solutions and working to advance the ecosystem in India. Joining us today is someone who embodies the GFIdeas community spirit and is a great role model for young talent looking to break into the sector, Armaan Dhanda. Armaan is co-founder of Possible Foods and a student at the National University of Singapore. Hi Armaan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for making time between classes, internships, and startup life to chat with us.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to do this episode.
So Armaan, before we get started, a little bit about you. You have successfully navigated the transition from a student researcher to startup founder, winning multiple grants and scaling your venture. Today, we will dive into your journey, industry opportunities, and strategies for success.
Perfect. That sounds great. That sounds great. I'm super excited for what's in store.
So, Arman, I know you travel a lot. I want to know what the strangest or most unexpected place you have had to take a business call for possible foods.
It was, I think, a random staircase inside a hotel at a conference, and a mentor called me out of the blue, asking for updates with what's happening. There've been quite a few calls at metro stations. There've been few calls, yeah, in weird places. But it's always nice to connect with people. Always nice to share what we're doing.
Yeah, that's true. And in virtual words, that's really, really funny sometimes. Even I remember you taking one call from a metro, and that was crazy. All right, with
Yeah.
that, let's move to very first question I have for you. What inspired you to enter the smart protein space and what continues to fuel your passion and interest to grow within it?
For sure. So I was introduced to the all protein sector through GFI's India Smart Protein Innovation Challenge 2021. This was in August or November of 2021. And I remember that because it was right before university started for me and high school had ended. So it was like the period in which uh, you practically have no commitments, exams are over, college is yet to start. And I was fortunate that I had like a golden period to immerse myself into the field. For those unaware, ISPIC was a 6 month long course come competition by GFI India, and it gave me like a very fundamental understanding of what is wrong with our food systems, and also encouraged me to to start researching, which eventually turned into possible foods. And what keeps me going right now is in order to solve for climate, you need to solve for food. The energy piece is being worked towards. The electric vehicle is piece is also being worked towards. But most people don't understand that our food systems are also a huge contributor to climate and greenhouse gas emissions. And our consumption patterns have historically not changed. They're actually going and are becoming worse. So we need options that taste the same or better, cost the same or less. And yeah, if we want to solve for climate, we have to solve for food.
Interesting that your journey started with ISPIC, because I think like for most of the young talent in India who are right now working and doing great things in the sector, be it like startups, be it researchers, I think somehow their journeys are really, really connected to some GFI India initiatives, and I think we will like discuss that more in the session ahead. Following upon that, Arman, what would you say are the like top three lessons you have learned in your journey from being a student leader at Delhi Smart Protein Project to now a startup founder?
Hmm. Three lessons. I think these lessons could be different for different audiences. What I fundamentally understood was if you're targeting people who are, let's say, in the business world and trying to convince them, selling them the sustainability first story might not always work. So you need to explain the economic side to it. If you're talking to somebody in government, then you need to talk about the policy implications and again the socioeconomic impact of the space. If you're talking to, let's say, somebody that focuses on environmentalism, then you need to talk about the nuances in the current food system and then convince them. So I think being a part and then trying to set up the Delhi Smart Protein project uh, taught me essentially how to communicate with different stakeholders and what sticks with each one of them. It's not like three top lessons. I think this lesson itself is just so multifaceted that it's just carried forward in the venture as well. So this one thing, the ability to converse and convince different stakeholders, is one thing that I really value, and I credit DSPP for it.
Will I be right if I call it a founder's mindset?
Yeah, definitely. Because it's scrappy. You're going to the admin is not agreeing for you to set up a society because they are convinced that it won't last. You are pitching, you're convincing, you're telling the story. There are no funds, funds are limited. You have to tie up with others, collaborate for your events to work. So it's a lot of it's an absence of resources, but a vision coming together, and that essentially is what entrepreneurship is. So yeah, it I think it prepared me well enough for the journey ahead and the uncertainties.
And yeah, that's really true. And can you tell like one more lesson, say, for any student who is like trying to build this kind of leadership skill and the things you mentioned right before?
Any lessons? Essentially, the learning opportunities are so immense, especially when you're starting out in a new field, because everything is in its nascency. So any field that you pick up in all proteins has huge potential. Uh, like what I would do in hindsight is just follow my gut and just go in a direction where my natural curiosity is the best. If it's policy, I'll dive deep there. If it's the entrepreneurship side, I'll go deep there. If it's, let's say, the marketing side or the socioeconomic aspects, I'll go deep there. So, one lesson would be to explore wide enough in a sector, decide what you're attracted by, and then going deep. And because value is only created at the absolute edge of a field. So yeah, that could also be a lesson.
Well said, Arman. Exploring wide and diving deep. Moving on, how critical do you think ecosystem support is? Grants, fellowships, student movements, innovation challenges, as you said earlier, and then the networking and internship opportunities. You have experienced them all. What role have they played in your entrepreneurial journey?
That's a very good question. For anyone that I talk to who's just starting out in a new field, especially something that's in its nascency, still trying to get attention from major stakeholders, what I usually advise people is you should be part of the for-profit as well as a non-profit sector for that field. So in the case of all proteins, the for-profit was the venture that we're creating. The non-profit was a GFI, and what that gives you is different comparisons of how people are thinking. You get an inside view on how people in academia are thinking, in policy, in government, in maybe the investor landscape. So you're at a vantage point in which you can make sense of raw data. And yeah, so being part of both is important. And in particular, fellowships, competitions are always extremely helpful. And ISPIC also ended with like a prize money of about one lakh rupees is what I remember. And that really sets the ground for what needs to happen. What I feel is still in its nascency, is slightly absent today in India, which is actually being built out by the Department of Biotechnology, is access to labs at a subsidized rate, so that anyone anywhere who has fundamental knowledge of the sciences can access those resources and experiment. So the like BIRAG DBT is doing a phenomenal job improving access to these facilities, and I think that kind of support is also super important. And India, I feel, is definitely poised for young talent building out technology, testing it out, getting feedback, and then iterating.
For sure, Arman. And like there is this old saying that you need to keep sowing and it will harvest at right time. And I guess like be it non-profits like GFI or even the government bodies like DBT, BIRAC, MOFP, they are trying to like do their share and they are like putting out schemes, putting out grants for and they are trying to support the research ecosystem. They are trying to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem by setting up their incubators, biomanufacturing policies, and great example. And I think like these small steps, they are sowing seeds for a like future of plant-based proteins for that reason, like cultivation-based proteins and fermented proteins.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think like the GFI resources and initiatives are indeed super helpful for students, entrepreneurs, and all type of stakeholders invested in
Correct.
the
I
system.
mean, like I have a very vivid memory in 2021 when I was introduced of me just going over the 100, 200 page state of the industry report, state of science reports, the three or four different industries that GFI was covering: fermentation, cell-based, plant-based, and just diving deep. From there, you figure out what companies exist, what organizations exist, then stalking the founders and then figuring out how to get in touch with them. And just reading about those stories was so fascinating. So yeah, it's extremely fair to say that if that kind of support was not there, I actually wouldn't know where to go. And the other thing was there were regular webinars that were happening because it was the COVID year. So there were very cool people who would come on these webinars, interact, and I would be spamming the the question section and just asking questions that I couldn't find answers to. So having that support system has been extremely critical, especially in the early days of you not knowing what to do, what to read, who to talk to. So I'm generally grateful for that.
Could you talk a bit more about how one can access some of the other opportunities you spoke of today, like the grants, fellowship, etc. Even you can touch some part of investments.
For sure, for sure. So my source of getting to know, I think step one is getting to know that these exist and where to apply, who to get in touch to. So what I have done over the last few years is curate my LinkedIn in a way that any person that I follow is essentially the one who's either part of an organization that talks about this or is the one creating this. And whenever a new fellowship comes or a new hackathon comes, new competition comes, they are the first ones to post about it. So, I don't Google up competitions or I don't go to another website for it. My LinkedIn feed is the only place I go to, and it's curated in a way that I can get access to these opportunities. And what we firmly believe is that when you have a hypothesis, when you have an idea to test out, getting dilutive capital is not the best way to go, especially in a country like India and in like broader Asia, where funding something that's not validated is a task. It's tough to get access to that kind of money. So the best way is to get access to these grants, apply. India has the Startup India scheme in which you can get a few lakh rupees at a pretty good deal, pretty decent deal. BIRAC has the big program, which is also substantial amounts of money. The only caveat with larger grant, like a grant of let's say more than 20 lakhs, 30 lakhs, 50 lakhs, that usually takes some time to come. But yeah, I like if I would go back, I would continue to apply to a lot of these grant opportunities. A lot of them also have criteria that you need different stakeholders involved. So you might need somebody from academia, somebody from industry, maybe a large corporation involved. So it's always valuable to attend conferences to meet up different kinds of people, talk to them. As you correctly mentioned, sow the seeds in those places. You never know when they would reap the reward.
Sure. So I see it as three words like focus, consistency, and patience. And you are doing all three. You leveraging your LinkedIn for like getting all this information in like one place, curating it to get most impact out of it. And I think that's very encouraging. So, Arman, we are discussing the opportunities. There must be some challenges and gaps. From your perspective, what more can the global and Indian smart protein ecosystem do to help provide the necessary support to startups?
Yeah, that's a very important question, Akash. And what I've realized is it takes time to build up a network so that you could maybe just call up a professor or call up somebody in industry to get advice. But what I feel is slightly absent today and can be worked towards more is collaborations on the industry and academia front. What industry is good at is actually what academia is good at is proving that it can happen. Publish a paper, get citations, rise up the ranks. That's usually how academia works. Industry is how do you make money. So the goal of industry is how do you take something that's proven to work and make it economically viable. And there is like a fundamental gap there. One insight that I can give you about India in particular, and then extrapolate of like how the world is slightly different, is the landscape of patents. Now, I've had the fortune, I've been extremely fortunate to work in the best labs, be it at IIT Bombay, be it at NUS. I'm currently at MIT. And what I can confidently say is that equipment at the best labs is the same. The level of research that can be done is the same. Um, India and Singapore and different countries in Southeast Asia can become leaders in even the foundational level of work. The thing that's slightly absent is nuance on how do you commercialize it. And one very particular example that elucidates it is patenting. Now, CSIR, which is the government-backed research institutions, they they've so many good patents, great patents, but only 0.7%, like less than 1% of them were licensed to industry. Now, this number in the US is crosses 70% for the best institutions. Like for Harvard, MIT, Stanford, like three-fourths or more than like 70% of technology developed is licensed. Now, if you dive a level deeper, this is slightly technical, but when you file a patent, you can file it only in India. And then there's something called a PCT application, which enables you to be protected in other geographies. Now, PCT is very expensive. It's extremely expensive. Depending on geographies, the cost increases. So most Indian researchers do groundbreaking research at CSIR, file for Indian patents, but they do not file for the PCT. And in that 18-month, I think it's 18 or 30-month period, if you don't file the PCT, you cannot renew it. And it's a pain. It's a huge pain for you to renew that later on in life. And what the US ecosystem does is there's so much money here. The stakeholders are identified when the technology is starting to be developed. So the cost of filing IP is often taken over by the company, or there's a different sharing model. So what I think Indian ecosystem and the Asian ecosystem at large can learn is essentially how does the translation of research happen? Not just foundational work. How do ecosystems like the US translate that research into commercial success? So yeah, predominantly that. I think that's a gap. and there are frameworks at work. We only need to learn from them and imbibe.
Yeah, and I see that awareness also like growing in India as well. Like the young researchers, they think like industry, they know like whatever things they are going to do in lab, they try to do it in a way from the like day one that it can be translated into wealth, it can be translated into value, and that can help industries, that can help people at the end of day.
Exactly. And the other thing is, uh, I can talk about this a bit more, but especially when you're converting something that's been done in academia into industry, the first question that you, or the few questions that you necessarily ask are, is there any regulatory risk? That's the first question. Is it too novel and regulation would take too long and you might not make money? The second is, who's cutting the check? Who's actually paying for this innovation? And are they incentivized enough to pay for it? um, you really need to do your customer tests and customer interviews and understand if there's a fundamental need for this. And I think the last very important question is, cool, it's happened in the lab, but how does it scale? Is the supply chain mature enough for it? Are there facilities which you can maybe utilize in order to achieve that kind of volume? So yeah, predominant questions also exist, which I think are relevant across the ecosystem everywhere.
Yeah, and especially when like it's a emerging sector, growing sector, there is a lot of new thing happening. It's especially challenging to for us also to understand what will take up and what will not. So it's really up to the researchers and the people who are taking it up for, as their career, who will be like spending most of their time in doing that. They should really, really consider all the factors that you mentioned. There is some path-breaking innovation happening in the alternative protein science, and I am sure you have seen and heard it all. What, according to you, is one of the most exciting innovations happening right now? This could be across plant-based fermentation or cultivated protein technologies.
For sure. I think particularly platform technologies that can work across multiple industries are of huge value because they can be applied in pharmaceuticals, in food, in materials. So there are a few that I'm particularly impressed by. There's an industry called optogenetics, which is essentially light-based control of your reaction, which is extremely important. To give like a specific example, in fermentation, your growth is important and your secretion is important. In order to produce a high value compound, the strain reaches a particular density, and then you need to like induce something, which in industry is usually a chemical. But in optogenetics, that can be light. So light-based control of microbes is something that's very fascinating because it can simplify processes. You can finely tune it. Light is practically free of cost. Some other things which are also enabling for other industries. And again, my background is mostly fermentation, so I'm heavily biased there, and that's my sample space. But what I'm fascinated by is continuous culture and sterility, because these two things are key enablers to bring down costs to a level where it tastes the same or better, costs the same or less, potentially, hopefully less. And the biggest costs for fermentation today are sterility and not being able to produce your reactors or keep them active for a long duration. The downtime is too high. So, a few enabling technologies there are UV based reactors, in which sterility can be maintained at will, like after your reaction has ended. For continuous culture, the big problem is sterility for sure, but it's also there's a data problem that's attached to it. Slightly getting technical, there are companies that have figured out achieving different steady states so that instead of getting one data point, you could get 100 data points from one run. That's also very cool. And obviously, there's no conversation that can go without AI. There are a lot of applications of AI in this space, but one that I'm fascinated by today is utilizing AI to design proteins. for specific downstream functions. It could be maintaining taste for, let's say, 10 seconds instead of 20 seconds for mouthfeel, or it could be, let's say, inducing a particular texture in through like the structure of the mycelia. So there are multitude of applications there, but it's such a vast field. You can work along any sector.
Interesting. You went into your chemical engineer chef safety shoes right now and explained a lot of technical terms. And I think like these are the fundamental challenges because mainly because the technologies were not designed to generate a lot of food, but for some specific enzymes, for specific additives, pharmaceutical mainly. If I like go few years back, this was so much futuristic. And even like I also think biomanufacturing and 3D printing are the exciting spaces that are growing and have a lot of potential for accelerated success. This sounds so futuristic a few years back, and now the products are already out there. Based on these advancements in technology, what do you think will be the most in-demand skills in the sector in the near future?
Yeah, that's also an important question, and it's something that I think about often. And like I can talk about it from an entrepreneur's perspective because that's where I have most experience. And I think one thing that you or anyone should definitely learn is how to utilize AI tools to the best of your ability. So today, I don't find review papers. Like I've stopped doing that. What I do is it's a prompt to OpenAI's deep research, which is like a two-paged prompt exactly detailing what I want the review paper to cover and what kind of papers I wanted to read or what kind of report I wanted to generate. And it takes about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and gives a beautiful answer. And that's my starting point whenever I want to read about a new technology, a new business opportunity, a new domain altogether in our space. So that streamlined processes a lot, a lot. And like what I feel, this is a slightly tangential opinion, but what I feel is the divide is only going to increase. People who are specialized would become super specialized, and you would require less of their time because hypothetically you want to write a patent. You would initially go to a patent officer. Maybe it's a 10-hour job, but now 8 of those hours can be taken by AI and they only need to proofread it for 2 hours. So having the ability to write good prompts and understand what's happening is important. The other thing is also slightly philosophical, but you need enough context to have clarity to understand where the space is going, and hence also being part of the profit and the non-profit sector, attending conferences, talking to people, being active, posting content. All of these things just give you like again a vantage point to figure out where the field is headed. So having clarity is also super important, especially for an entrepreneur. But if the question was mostly around people who are looking to work in this space, then I might not have an answer, unfortunately. But what's fundamental is it's important to have opinions, and to have opinions, it's important to read far and wide and understand and talk to people. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, and I guess the exposure that one gets during the college years or the early career years that makes a really huge impact if you are like exposed to variety of ideas, new technologies. If you get some hands-on on those technologies, I think that takes you a long way.
For sure.
I wanted to ask you
Definitely.
this, like, do you believe one must have a scientific background to ideate, innovate, or succeed in smart protein?
Scientific mind, yes. Scientific education, no. Definitely not. My co-founder Samyak, he's great. He's studying economics. Economics is not conventionally classified in STEM in a lot of places, but a lot of the ideas come from him, especially on scaling, on implementation, on adding value. Um, At times having being extremely scientific or extremely technical can also be a negative side because you're never thinking about scale. You're always thinking, oh, how do I increase the yield in a 500 ml reactor while you have to operate at 100,000 liters in order to generate any meaningful money. So maybe a scientific mind is important, which can be trained for. You don't need a scientific education for it. It's just a matter of exposing yourself to those words. And a year down the line, when you've been reading every day, what made zero sense to you is coming to you very easily. And I can actually attest to that.
Yeah, you used a really nice term like scientific mind or scientific understanding rather than a like a scientific background for that reason. So could you explain that term more, what you call a scientific mind?
For sure, for sure. I think a scientific mind, what it encapsulates is you can comfortably understand the terminologies that are utilized in a domain so that you can converse with somebody who's an expert in their field without hesitation. Like you can ask good questions, and it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. It's taken me multiple tries and a lot of readings, talking to people, listen to podcasts in order to understand the lingo. Scientific mind is that. Scientific mind is also, if you come across, let's say, a new technology, having the ability to break it down to a fundamental level to understand what's happening, like what is the real deal that's happening. To give you a very, very fundamental example, even making insulin is essentially precision fermentation. Back then, the terminology did not exist, so it was metabolic engineering or strain engineering. But on a very foundational level, it's that. So I think that is a scientific mind.
Well said, Arman. Next, I want to talk money with you. A critical component needed to start up in this space is capital. What, according to you, are some of the best funding options available to an early stage founder in smart proteins? And how does one go about exploring and accessing these opportunities?
Sure. I think capital is obviously an important part of all of it. And what what has worked for us was getting access to non-dilutive sources. A lot of them were hackathons and competitions instead of simply grants. So, so yeah, I think working on your pitching skills, telling a story, are as important as building a product is. So maybe doubling down, honing that is also important. Um, the other thing is if you can, and this is a tough one, by the way, this is not easy. If you can convince your end consumer, it could be a big CPG company like a Unilever or an ITC. It could also be your average consumer, depending on what you're doing, B2B or B2C. If you can convince them to pay you a very small amount of money in order for you to develop it and give it to them, you could maybe bypass conventional fundraising. So, having customers is possibly the biggest validation that there is a need for what you're doing. And figuring out that is a huge task. So what I would say is start, talk to people, pitch your idea, show the vision, and soon enough, hopefully, you'd have backers.
Yeah, and like to do that in right direction from someone who have walked that path for a while now, where would you direct our audience to, like some resources, some opportunities which are really helpful to you, which you think like worth sharing with them as well?
For sure. I think competitions that are similar to ISPIC are definitely a good starting point for people who are new to the field. For people who are already in the field, grant opportunities like BIRACS, BIG, as I mentioned, is a good one. What also a lot of people overlook is engaging with faculty to co-write grants with professors. I think that's underappreciated, underlooked in India, and I see a huge potential there, like a huge opportunity there. What also happens is different countries have their grant opportunities. So I think recently there was a India Singapore grant There are India-Israel grants, or there are different geography grants in which if you have a stakeholder, let's say in a different country, you could co-write for this, and it's government money that comes to different entities, and work is divided, work is shared. So these are also important that a lot of people often overlook. What else? Uh, Depends on what stage you're in, but yeah, essentially, if you're a student, early stage, still figuring out, then non-dilutive pitch competitions are good. If you're more mature, have some technology, some patents, then these larger grants are better.
These are some great insights and all the great opportunities to pursue. Let's talk about the red flags. What's the one thing people should stop wasting time on when it comes to securing funding?
Huh. I think a lot of people deny that there's competition in what they're doing, and I think that's foolish because even single cell proteins, they received $1 billion in the 1960 to 80 belt duration. So mycoproteins and everything that's been done today was scaled up and has succeeded and failed. Like there was an entire conference on single cell protein by Pekilo, which they revived now in 1978 for animal feed. And I think there's insane value in going over literature which is 50 years, 60 years, 80 years ago. And I can almost guarantee you that what you're trying to do, somebody has tried and failed and published that. So a red flag that usually comes about, especially for me, is when you're talking to anyone. Investor could be an archetype, but if you're talking to anyone and you say, "Oh, what we're doing is so interesting, so novel, there's no competition," I know you haven't done your research.
That's a really critical point, as you said, like explore wide, then dive deep. And once you have dived really, really deeper, then only consider going out and then talking to people. Because yes, I agree with you. Even while like doing this research thing in colleges, like most of the students, they used to write the whole paper and then they're like, okay, somebody has already done it. Yeah, so Arman, there are many investors currently interested in this space, and most of them are listed on GFI India's investor database on our website. There is also a grant database which like helps students and researchers access all the opportunities, etc. Arman, I would like to turn the tables a little bit now. You must have interacted with lots of investors in your journey. I want to understand how do you or how does anyone in the sector pitch to investors who don't understand this industry?
That's a brilliant question, and one that's very important. I think you would definitely, investors are smart. They know what's happening, but if they don't know about the sector, then their knowledge is that of like a 10th grade student or a ninth grade student in that aspect. So I have a 10th grade, I have a sister who's in 10th grade. What I do is whenever there's a new deck or a new memo or white paper that we're making to send to investors, I show it to my sister. And if she can understand it, and if she can explain it back to me that, Acha, bhaiya, you are doing this, it happened in this space, and now this is how you're different. If she can just tell me that, then I know that the language and the way of presentation is good enough. So she is my litmus test. Yeah, it's important. It's super important to bring it down to the absolute fundamentals. Why are you doing this? Why is it important? Why you? When will you make money? The amount of money that you're raising, how long will it last? What the milestones are? What are the big risks? Like, why would you not succeed? All of these are super important questions that you need either a document or a slide deck to convey.
Yeah, I think like it is like about convincing yourself first that okay, this is something and okay, I am clear about all the aspects, and then maybe consider going to an investor. So at least you are sure about your idea and you know what's going to happen and how I am going to make profit out of it because you are ultimately the one who will be doing that thing. Now, I have a few questions for you from our GF Ideas India community members. These were the most voted questions that the community wanted you to answer. The first question is, what's the best or most unexpected thing that's helped your career?
I think I would have to say the scholarship at NUS because studying abroad is expensive, and it's a huge privilege to graduate debt free, and that also encourages you to take risk at a young age. So maybe it's that. Maybe it's the scholarship, and it was unexpected. It was very
Yeah,
unexpected. Like I did not even expect getting into NUS, let alone a scholarship.
and you said it right. You need to know that competition exists, and I know like how competitive that scholarship is because like it's dream of
Yeah.
almost like most of the students. So and
Like like I have to
yeah,
credit a lot of people for it. Like it's just not my effort. It's like it takes a village, is what they say, and that's very true. Very true. Like it's not my success alone.
that's true. Coming to second question, what's step one when starting a smart protein startup?
I think step one is understanding, especially if it's a startup, is what value chain are you playing on along? Because if you're in, even if you've decided that you're doing fermentation and not plant-based, you can be on the technology development side, you can be on the scaling side, you can be on the consumer side, you can be on the brand building side. You can, like, understanding the exact role that you want to play is very important. The biggest mistake that we made was we wanted to be a deep tech company as well as a consumer led D2C product company. And for the longest time, both Samyak and I were living in delusion that we can do both. But little did we know that both have different markets, entirely different teams, different people, different investors to back you, different ways that you're gauged by others that you're successful or not successful. So choosing your battles and understanding what value chain you want to play on is, I think, the first step that one should take.
Yes, I think I also feel that it's really important to understand what your strengths are and what makes you feel good, like doing those things exactly, getting deeper into those things rather than trying to like do everything. And I also feel sometimes the founder is not always the most suited position for everyone. Your interest might be diverse, and if you choose that, you will be the happiest person doing that thing. Yeah, and like as we are near to the end of this discussion, I have one last question for you. If you were to read a front page headline about smart protein in India in 2035, what would you hope for it to be?
2035, what would I hope it to be? Um, that's a tough question. That is a tough question. I think I have spent so much time on fermentation, and I think there's huge potential for sugar mills to set up mycoprotein shops and produce it for India at India prices. So, what I want the 2035 headline to show is bioethanol plants and sugar mills set up the largest mycoprotein facility for local consumption. I think that's the headline that I want to see.
Yeah, like, and I completely agree with you on this. Like, first the sugar, then they went into ethanol, and I think the next opportunity for India is one of the like largest cooperative sectors. Like, it's sugar. There are a lot of farmer livelihoods based on that. They generate a lot of income for country, and like the next big thing they can do is getting into fermentation of, and then growing proteins out of it. Hopefully, like this industry
Exactly.
will, and I already see some interest growing in that industry. So I'm also really hopeful about it.
Super cool. Super cool. Yeah. So that would be a very promising headline.
We hope the best.
Definitely. Definitely. It's one step at a time. with the right intention. That's all.
Yeah, to just summarize our discussions, Arman, like we touched upon opportunities, challenges, different skills required to grow in the sector, a founder's mindset, or the leadership skills that you can develop as a student interacting with others. The networking you mentioned, how important it is and how to do it effectively. I think that is going to be a really, really valuable resource being there for years for our audience.
Arman, it's been great having you on the podcast. Your journey, insights, and advice will be invaluable for so many of our listeners. To everyone listening, if today's conversation inspired you, whether you are a student, researcher, or aspiring entrepreneur, the smart protein industry needs innovative minds like yours.
It was a pleasure doing this. I didn't
Yeah,
even know where time went. And yeah,
as
enjoyed a lot. And I
yeah.
genuinely relived a lot of memories. Like I haven't talked about this in a while. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
If you find this episode useful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a Smart Protein Pod video episode. And if something resonates with you, drop us a comment. We would love to hear your thoughts. If you are listening on Spotify, don't forget to follow and turn on notification so you never miss a new episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. To connect with GFI India for more opportunities, join GFIdeas India community today. See you in the next episode of Smart Protein Pod.